Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. Apologies for being a couple of minutes late. We just had the requisite IT challenges at the moment of starting, so we're just going to give it a few seconds for people to connect. Okay, so welcome to this webinar from iMOVE on our evolving transport and mobility workforce, understanding and addressing future digital skills gaps. So I'll start today by saying that we're hosting this webinar on the lands of the Bunurong people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be on this webinar today. The webinar is going to summarise the findings and recommendations from a project that's been running over the last year, which is an iMOVE project with the Department of Infrastructure and also with our researchers, Swinburne University of Technology. So in the first instance, I would like to welcome all of you to the webinar and invite you to make contributions throughout in the Q&A that's at the bottom of the screen. We have the chat closed down so that we don't get confused about where all the questions are coming from, and we can moderate them. So any of these speakers and panelists will have access to the mic and camera. So we'll have a 30-minute presentation from our researchers at Swinburne University of Technology, followed by 25 minutes for Q&A. Now, for the Q&A, I would like to invite the questions on Q&A to both our researchers at Swinburne, but also to our colleagues at the Department of Infrastructure who are also attending this webinar today, and they'll be on hand to give their perspectives on the project. So just to give a little bit of context to the workforce project, I'd like to invite our Managing Director, Ian Christensen, to say a few words. Ian is out and about in the transport community pretty much every day and has got some perspectives on how people are feeling about the digital skills aspects of things and where the opportunities lie. So Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Jackie, and welcome to this iMOVE webinar. As I think you all know, the transport universe is going through a period of unprecedented change, brought on by the numerous new technologies that are being applied to improve the movement of people and goods. Most of those technologies are digital in nature, and so that exposes the transport sector to an enormous challenge for how to cope with these emerging technologies. It necessarily calls on transport operators and departments to boost their capability in the dealing with and processing of data. And when we looked at that, we quickly came to the realization that there are some significant gaps in capability around the network. So that was the basis for standing up this project. We needed to shine a light on the nature of the gaps and start to think about how we might close those gaps. So here to tell us about the gaps and the process to close them is Professor Hussein Dia and Associate Professor Hadi Ghaderi from Swinburne Uni. Over to you, Hussein.
Thank you so much, Ian, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Hussein Dia, and I have with me my colleague, Associate Professor Hadi Ghaderi, and together we will be taking you through the findings of this study. So before we start, I also would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands on which Swinburne's Australian campuses are located. And on behalf of those present, I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and hope that the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. So as Jackie mentioned, we're aiming for around 30-minute presentation covering why we did this research, how we went about doing it, what we found. Hadi will go over findings from a stakeholder consultation where we went out to understand what the industry thinks. Also, Hadi will present a prelim version of an interactive digital skills tool, which we are developing and seek to further develop as well. And finally, we conclude with some recommendations and policy pathways and future research. So essentially, the study aims or motivations was really to understand how do we develop a digitally skilled transport and mobility workforce of the future to meet those digitalization and automation trends and technologies that Ian mentioned. And part of that to first identify that, if we don't do anything, basically, what are the workforce impacts of these transport digitalization automation? What are the emerging skills that would be required? Who will be impacted, but also how can we upskill and transition existing workforce to meet new opportunities? What are the training needs required? And again, provide directions, if you like, for policy making in Australia as a result of what we found. So it was a desktop study. We based it on developing a framework for understanding the future skills requirement, looking at what are the key transport freight sectors and functional areas that are amenable to digitalization. What are the key drivers of change? What are the enabling and supporting technologies that we need to look at? And in many cases also, what are the emerging business models and scenarios that are expected to change the work ecosystem? So this is essentially the framework we started with to identify which of the transport and freight digitalization aspects will be impacted. And as you can see in this diagram, essentially, communities and governments have policies in place for transportation, for example, driving sustainability, economic viability, etc. And as part of these policies, they would be expecting certain outcomes in terms of emission reduction, travel safety, efficiency, productivity, etc. And in the middle, we've identified the key sectors and industries that are needed to deliver these outcomes. And as you can see as well, as part of that, the digitalization ecosystem is a smart mobility platform and the enabling technologies, which, as Ian mentioned as well, that we needed to examine in order to understand their potential impact. So I think there is general agreement in the literature that there are a number of emerging and slowly established trends that are going to have a big impact on transport in the future. And each of these trends, if you like, whether it is autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things, urban air mobility, etc., each of these technologies are quite important and profound in their own. The key value in the future is when their disruptive forces come together, and this is where we will see a value added to the industry and to community. And of course, all of this in the end is going to be supported by an AI dimension, if you like, that will bring everything together and also introduce more innovations. So in terms of background, looking at how prepared is Australia for transport digitalization and automation, in 2021, we completed a study for iMOVE and the department where we developed a best practice transport digitalization index by looking at a number of international indices and bringing them together to see how Australia fares, if you like. So Australia, according to our index, was ranked number 13 in the world. And as you can see there, South Korea, Japan, Netherlands, the US, Switzerland were essentially ranked in the top countries. And there were a lot of learnings and insights that we obtained from these countries that are advancing, and in particular, what is it they're doing to advance their workforce. This was a study that was limited to OECD countries. If it wasn't, you would also see Singapore as one of the top nations in this space as well. One of the key reasons why Australia did not score very well in our index is basically this particular World Digital Competitiveness ranking, where we scored 20 out of 64 nations. And one of the reasons our score was low is because of the digital skills and training basically falling behind other nations. So as you can see there, in terms of training and education, in terms of talent, etc., things have improved a little bit over the years, but still, compared to other nations, we are falling behind. There was also an Australian study that looked at the preparedness of the workforce, looking up to a time frame of 2030, conducted by the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. And as you can see in the third column of the table, under skills availability, this is where there was a lot of basically room to catch up and to improve, particularly in areas related to ITS, to low emission vehicles and so forth. And as I mentioned, we then started to look at what are the potential impacts of these technologies. And it was a desktop study supported by a large number of technical reports, both national and international. And I think I would like to highlight what we've written at the bottom of the screen there. Although this is a quote from 1966, saying that technology might eliminate jobs, but it will not eliminate work. I think this also still holds today. And as we go through, you will find there's going to be a lot of impact on certain occupations, but at the same time, there will be opportunities to introduce new occupations as well. So I think generally, if we look across the globe, if you like, so the operation-intensive sectors like transport are 1.3 times more likely to be automated than any other sector. So like in this particular study, we found that 39% of the total transport activities are likely to be impacted by automation and digitalization. Then we looked at how does that actually look inside transportation, if you like. And as you can see, we here highlighted a few items. So, driving-related occupations and maintenance-related occupations where we are expecting the major impact to happen. So you look at drivers, auto mechanics, and so forth. Now, interestingly, if you look at the industrial truck operators, unlike, for example, what we have been expecting in terms of robo-taxis, etc., and although there have been some developments with industrial truck operators, actually, it's very well established now, and there are many countries, especially in the US, where they have a lot of technologies already deployed on industrial sites, construction sites, mining sites, etc. Then we took a look at exactly what would it mean for Australia, and we relied on a number of studies in the literature as well, which essentially showed a similar trend. Drivers, particularly truck drivers, and also maintenance-related operations are the ones that are most likely to be impacted by these technologies going forward. And as you can see here, truck drivers in particular, which is one of the largest occupations in transport in Australia, if we don't do things to prepare for the transition, these positions are going to be most likely highly impacted. We again looked at, in terms of the impact of the technology up to the horizon 2034, looking at a number of studies. And as you can see there as well, there are a large number of positions or people who are likely to be impacted. 2.7 million people at risk of automation across Australia. But technology as well will be able to help augment some of these, which would lead to basically improvement in capacity, etc. So as you can see there, transport is one of those areas that are going to be impacted. Looking at some of the technologies that are going to be, again, mostly impacted. So again, you see truck drivers, store persons, etc. And the top technologies that are going to impact these groups were navigation, robotics, and process automation. It's interesting to see there are some occupations that are going to be unimpacted, if you like, others that are able to be automated, while others could be augmented to drive more productivity in the sector. And again, this is where these are the ones that are most exposed to automation. So again, you can see truck drivers, in the short term, medium term, and long term are likely to be most impacted. And also the jobs that are likely to be augmented, where technology can work alongside people to help drive productivity. Overall, in this particular study, there was some economic modeling done, and although there will be some jobs, around 197,000 jobs lost to automation by 2034, there were likely to be an additional 157,000 jobs introduced, both technical and non-technical, leading to a net decline of around 40,000 jobs. And again, this is assuming really we continue with business as usual, and we don't introduce new policies or interventions to address this. These are some of the jobs that are likely to be introduced, and as you can see, there are no surprises there. They're mainly technology-focused, software development, data engineers, data scientists, a lot of STEM positions that are there in the mix of potential jobs to be required in the future. We did 3 case studies. I'm going to report only on 2 of them here very quickly, but in the final report, which is available on the iMOVE website, you can also look at the warehouse automation. So the first one we looked at the autonomous trucks, or connected and automated trucks, to identify. First, we looked at how likely are these to come about. What are the time frames, and according to each time frame, what are the likely job losses, and what can be done about it as well. So we identified, as you can see here, 6 scenarios in which human-driven trucks could actually work in tandem with autonomous trucks. And as you move from scenario 1 to scenario 6, the technology improves, and there will be less reliance on human drivers. There are a number of ways this could transpire, and we identified stages for when this is likely to happen, from the really very short term, 3 to 5, 7 years, up to a horizon of 20 years, where we started, to identify trends, signals, developments in the industry, and identify what are the likely impacts on jobs in Australia according to these timelines. And again, as we mentioned before, there is a big likelihood that a large number of truck drivers will be impacted by this. However, at the same time, these technologies are going to require some new positions to be introduced. For example, this is a remote driver. So we are already seeing some of this on the mining sites, and even with the Waymo and the robo taxis. In case a vehicle does not know what to do, does not know how to behave, there will need to be a remote operator, if you like, looking after this and basically taking over and instructing or resolving any issues that might be introduced. So this is just an example of a potential future job that might come about. We also looked at electric vehicles and what impact, although it's not really one of the digitalization aspects, but what are the impacts on the workforce in terms of digitalization and automation. So one thing to establish from the beginning is that electric vehicles in general, because they don't have as many moving parts, are going to require less maintenance. So as you can see here in this table, there are some aspects that are going to reduce the number of jobs required, but there are some aspects like when we are rolling out the charging infrastructure where we're going to need more people. Some of the jobs of the future: electrical engineers, electronics engineers, industrial engineers, software developers, and so forth. Of course, Australia, we have lost most of the, or all of the vehicle manufacturing capability, but there is nothing stopping us from bringing this back, either to develop new vehicles, to build new vehicles, or to basically also sponsor some of the spare parts and supporting manufacturing industries that could support global manufacturing as well. So as you can see, there is production managers, and again, electrical and electronic engineers and assemblers in the lines and so forth. This is an area where we would expect a big impact, and especially in terms of introducing new jobs with maintenance. So looking at predictive maintenance of assets and infrastructure. So before things happen and before things break down, looking at developing technologies that can predict these in advance. And these will need to be supported by a well-developed digital workforce. And again, rolling this large infrastructure that we are expecting as part of the rollout of electric vehicles in Australia, which, as we saw last week with the introduction of the electric vehicle strategy and the anticipated introduction of the fuel efficiency standards, hopefully this will place Australia on a trajectory to roll out more vehicles. There was a study sponsored by the Electric Vehicle Council where they found, assuming we reach 50% uptake of EVs by 2030, which is quite ambitious, this could lead to increase, in employment by around 13,000 jobs, and also increase in the real GDP as a result. We also looked at the training needs and requirements, and again, it is no surprise, some of those gaps that we found, mainly looking at the developing knowledge of these emerging technologies, information technologies, cybersecurity, data analytics, IoT solutions, cloud computing, autonomous and robots, and subsystems as well, which, as we mentioned, are going to be key technologies in the future. So looking at some other studies as well, where they identified some of the top skill shortages facing new entrants in the transport sector. So as you can see there, programming, STEM occupations, technology design, etc., have been identified as areas where there could be quick returns on investment if we develop more skills in these areas. And in addition, these studies looked at the supporting human skills or soft skills that are needed to support the digital workforce, such as critical thinking, active listening, coordination, complex problem solving, which all together always come up as key human skills required in the future. So we took all this information and we went to the industry to solicit their feedback and understand the barriers they face. I will pass it now to Hadi to take us through these findings.
Thank you, Hussein, Ian, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll briefly present the results of our stakeholder consultation here. Just to mention that given the time constraint, what you see here is probably 1/4 of what we have done. So I'm just focusing here on the key findings, and if you're interested, the full report is now available, and we're happy to answer to any further questions. At the broadest level, what you see here is just, I'll start with some descriptive statistics of survey and participants. We have two main components of participants, the decision makers and the employees, and a quick summary. Next slide, please, Hussein. So we engaged with a pretty good size of stakeholders here, 231 decision makers and 291 employees. When we're looking at the percentages, it represents 44 and 56%. Looking at the sector they involve, majority represent the private sectors, but also we have a very good number from the public sector as well. But also the distribution is quite nice across various freight and transportation sectors, including public transport, active transport, maritime, shipping, rail, road, and other related fields, which could represent technology solution providers. Next, please, Hussein. Also, geographically, we had a very nice distribution that represents different states and key industrial areas as well. Next, please. Now focus on the decision makers. So from a decision maker point of view, from a size, basically organization type point of view, we again have a very good distribution across small, medium, and large enterprises. And also the type of people who were involved, they were majority managers, owners, directors, or any other executive roles. Next, please. First of all, as Hussein also mentioned, we wanted to sort of confirm and acknowledge the impacts of digitalization on businesses and how businesses have perceived this impact. So questions, there were several questions pertaining to this issue, including, for example, whether organization has changed its operations due to adoption of digital technologies and automation. We can see a very large portion of organizations have confirmed this. We look at this also whether the organization has a digital or automation transformation strategy in place. And this was quite interesting that we turned out that more than half of participants, employers, which represents our organization, they either don't have or uncertain whether they have a digital transformation or automation strategy in place. And this is quite concerning but interesting, and opens up a lot of new avenues for future research. Other questions also included whether the introduction of digitalization has any impact on retirement of traditional roles held by human in their organization. And we see also a quite balanced, as you saw from our literature as well, that some, depending on the role, this in some areas this could be quite significant, and in some other areas could be quite unimpacted. But also in other questions that relate whether the organization feels that whether they have a digital skills gap related to the core competencies currently and future. And this was also very, very obvious that they confirmed the existence of such gap in terms of skills. For this, there were more uncertainty about future, whether what type of skills are required in the next 5 years. Next, please. We were also interested to see where do organizations see themselves in terms of their level of transport and freight, digital and automation skills. When doing a self-assessment, they consider themselves mainly around basic and intermediate areas. Then we engage with them to ask them, rank themselves against the national leaders. The majority of them, we can see a very nice normal distribution here. They see themselves at the same level with the national leaders, but this depends also on the size of the organization. We see the size in the small, the graph is more skewed towards right. In the large organization, this is more towards left, showing that they see themselves higher as average. However, when we ask them to rate themselves against international leaders, we see that the responses are more towards lower, demonstrating lower, either somehow or much lower digital transport skills, freight skills compared to international leaders. Next, please. Then we also engage with them to understand whether the organization, the digital, for those who did have a digital transformation strategy in place, whether that strategy includes a skills workforce development component, and we can see majority are responding to yes. So it's showing that if an organization is thinking about new new digital and transformation strategies and practices in place, they all considering the workforce and the human aspect of this as well. Other questions also relate to whether digital upskilling is part of organizations' people development strategy, and again was quite high. Whether employees are motivated to embrace digital transformation and developing their digital skills. For some was quite high, for some was more in the middle, undecided. This also depends on the size of the organization. For some organizations, they basically say no, and it is understandable because they're quite small organizations. So for a let's say a trucking company that compromises 3 people, there is no such formal strategy in place as well. But quite interestingly, the question was around whether digital upskilling, they believe whether digital upskilling directly contributes to the competitive advantage. And we have very much positive sentiment towards yes, agree and strongly agree. Very limited responses, disagree or disagree. And again, that could come down to the size of the organization. Next, please. Then we were a bit more deeper with them in terms of understanding the plans. So does your organization undertake or has plans to undertake a workforce knowledge and digital skill audit, basically whether they have any plans to do a capability mapping. Here the response was more towards no, and a lot of organizations, especially small size organizations, they had an answer or no, they don't have such plan to do such an audit or a mapping exercise. Also, the next question was whether the organization have a digital workforce training strategy in plan or scheduling place. But again, the questions were more, the responses were more towards no or undecided, which is a bit, again, an area of interest for future research. We were also interested to see what level of qualification is most appropriate to address the future digital skills gap. Surprisingly or not surprisingly, there was a lot of responses towards the non-accredited industry-based training and professional development, followed by vocational training solutions. And perhaps there is a justification here that organizations are seeing an immediate requirement for upskilling, and perhaps a university degree or those who takes longer may not be the right solution for them to address the current immediate skill gap. Next slide, please. We were also interested to see what type of technologies are of interest or required by the organizations in the future and at what skills level. Basically, distributed, if I'm not mistaken, distributed cloud and computing technologies were the most required type of skills, followed by cybersecurity, digital safety, and IoT technologies and sensing technologies. We also, the lowest technologies were blockchain, followed by extended reality, AR, VR, and also data management, data query. We also had a chance to ask which technology is least required. Actually, it is not required for your for the type of operations you have. If I'm not mistaken correctly, blockchain again was one of the was the highest, followed by extended reality, including mixed virtual reality as well, and virtual warehousing, 3D printing. Next slide. In the second part, we'll share with you the results, the feedback and response by the employees. As I mentioned, there were many more questions, but given the time frame, we're just sticking to the most important ones. So employees here were asked to provide us a feedback on what are the key technologies, digital and automation tools that they currently use, and is directly related to requirements of their role. The most popular one were related to automatic identification and data collection, solutions around RFID, QR, barcode databases, followed by analytics and statistics, and distributed cloud and advanced computing. So the reason perhaps that there's a lot of focus around the automated identification and data collection is that our survey involves a large group of warehousing and freight operators as well, and in that domain, such tools are quite popular. In terms of least popular ones, again, blockchain, extended reality, and virtual warehousing, 3D printing were released. There were also a lot of others responses, and this is not surprisingly because organizations develop different types of technology and solution over time, and they may not necessarily fall into these categories. Next slide, please. In terms of digital skills gap and impacts now in the future, from the view of employees, we were interested to see whether the employers are aware that there is basically organizations aware of the impacts of automation and digitalization on the employees' role and the role requirement. The highest goes to the agreed option, but still there's a big number around undecided, so that also is concerning a little bit. Employees were asked to respond whether the organization currently has a digital skills gap related to the core transport and freight activities, currently and also in the future, and the response is again both unsure and followed by yes, agree, and strongly agree. So there is a positive sentiment that the employees believe in such skills gap as well. Next one, please. We're also interested to see generally what's the sentiment, the feeling from the employees, or whether they feel they're ready for the future as well. So questions were related to how do they rate their overall digital skills, and majority are around literacy, competency, and proficiency, very little around savvy or fluency. They were also questioned whether they feel prepared for now and the future, and there's a lot of uncertainty, as you can see from the response. They undecided, they're unsure whether they're ready, and that itself, it's a unpreparedness. It's an indicator of unpreparedness. But they were also quite positive, that showing that whether they believe that digital skills training would make them more successful, and there's quite a lot of positive sentiment towards that, agreeing and strongly agreeing that it will make them more successful. Next, please. We also keen, because it's eventually it's an employee who receives the training, to see what is the most appropriate type of training that they are interested. We've done this based on also gender of respondents as well, and it's quite surprising after the COVID and a lot of online learning and blended learning that the employees strongly prefer a face-to-face component as part of their training, whether this will be at the current organization premises or within or in the trainers or education provider location. But the face-to-face component was very, very, as you can see, quite recognized as a requirement. Next, please. And finally, this is my last slide here. Given the data that we have captured, we also developed a interactive digital skills self-assessment tool where, so we had a quite large number of employees responding that this is at this level, or level of proficiency, and that is based on that we have created a self-assessment tool that anyone can go there and basically rank themselves against the digital skills readiness that we have developed here. Thank you, Hussein.
Thank you, Hadi. And we leave you with some of the recommendations we have made. It is really about identifying these policy directions, where there were three major categories, and the first one was about having, developing leadership and national commitment to this topic. So, the need to elevate this to a national agenda, probably organize a national summit that brings a lot of stakeholders together to discuss this, looking at setting up an entity to provide that leadership role. For example, the Office of Future Transport Technologies in the Department of Infrastructure, or for example, it could be iMOVE. These would be very well funded to create new national grant programs, create digital skills and jobs platforms, look at improving methods and initiatives to improve workforce diversity and women participation, and also to be able to provide direction and guidance to governments and to industry as well. It's a rapidly developing area, if you like, and governments and organizations need to fully understand what do these technologies mean for their businesses. The second one is to develop some national standards. When we were looking at this, we found that there were still some ambiguities in terms of a general, unique or uniform standard. So, undertake a national digital literacy audit to fully understand where we are, define and embed the occupational digital literacy in educational policies, look at formulating a national digital literacy curriculum in transport, particularly investing in research to develop scalable learning technologies, and also to look at developing both short and long-term training programs. It is very important to foster that partnership with other organizations, government, academia, industry. This will help to bring the sectors together, build trust, and basically strengthen the link between industry and national outputs. Looking at providing some tax incentives for organizations who lead, by providing their workforce with these digital skills training, if you like. Look at introducing some incentives. Look at also introducing something like in Singapore, where every citizen receives a budget from government to actually improve their digital skills. And also to look, perhaps there are ways to look at a holistic approach to tax policy to help organizations invest more and get more deductions for investments in technologies and training. In terms of future research directions, as Hadi mentioned, this was a limited size sample. It would be important to increase the sample size and look at more industries within transport as well. And in addition, it was a bit broad what we did this time. It would be important to do a deep dive into some certain industries like supply chain, logistics, or long-haul trucking, etc., to fully understand some of the responses that were provided, and also to get industry involved in the design of next generation training solutions or training models. We mentioned the lack of standardization, so that would be something important to consider in future research, and also looking at developing a framework for these digital skills by occupation. So, for traffic engineers in particular, as an example, what are the exact needs for store persons, what are the exact needs, and doing a deep dive in that as That brings us to the end of the presentation. The final report is available on the iMOVE website. Encourage everyone to have a look. It has much more detail than we were able to provide today. Thank you.
I'd like to invite, I know we've got a few of our iMOVE staff and a few of the departmental staff who are with us today as able to answer questions. So I'd like to invite you to switch your cameras and mics on and make yourselves available. But just to have a little bit of a conversation around some of the skills. You touched on the soft skills side of things there, but I'm seeing when we did the registrations, we asked people to tell us what their particular challenges were. And one thing that comes up time and time again is actually the ability to manage change. And organizations of varying sizes are struggling to find ways to do that. So on a practical level, you know, what does that mean in the context of your research, and how can we help people? Over to Hadi or Hussein. Did that come out strongly?
Yeah, no, that's right. Okay, we're happy to have a go at this, and this is a major challenge for organizations, especially those looking to implement digitalization. I mean, we fully understand, because there are so many new technologies, you know, popping up, and they get, you know, people saying, "Oh, here's a new technology, you know, that is going to be promising in the future." But I think it's important to continue to engage with the research community, with the conferences, people who are attending on the call today as well. You know, these sort of information dissemination, seminars and webinars and opportunities, because, you know, we, for example, in this particular research, we went through investigating a lot of the trends and signals. There are a lot of noisy signals, some things that, you know, the tech industry says, you know, these are important, but we know after studies, after some opportunities to look at them, you know, they're not going to be as meaningful in the future. But at the same time, those signals and trends that are, no, actually we need to have a closer look at it and see how we can help organizations understand the impacts on their business models and how do they manage that change.
Yeah.
And I can add something probably here as well. As you know, from this study, we also looked at soft skills, which we just didn't have the time to present the results here. Then there was a quite strong requirement by the employers on the soft skills. And soft skills are one of the soft skills, ability to change, ability to adopt and be flexible. So we can't stop the technology to, you know, stop the evolvement, but we can train the new workforce to be adaptable to these changes. So they can learn quicker and they can adopt quicker. So I think this is as Hussein mentioned, the educational piece and the awareness piece is very important, but also the focusing on the human aspect and the learner's aspect as well is very important. And we have seen more recently with the introduction of AI, generative AIs and ChatGPT. So there's many organizations are now focusing on hiring people who have critical thinking and have the ability to adapt and change quickly. So I think this relates to that social and soft skills as well.
Yeah, thanks, Hadi. I noticed we got Jacqueline, who's hopped on from the Department of Infrastructure. Thanks, Jackie. You're brave enough to put your camera on, which is great. Just in terms of the recommendations, obviously you've got quite a lot to work with there. What I suppose a few people in the audience might be wondering what the next steps are for the department in terms of what you're going to do with this information. Can't hear you, Jackie. It seems like you might have the wrong microphone. You're not on mute. Still can't hear you. Is there... Oh, we've got Darren who may be able to respond.
Yeah. Look, I'm conscious of Jackie's microphone problems, but yeah, look, happy to jump in. Firstly, guys, want to really thank all the work that's gone into this really interesting report. It's so important for us to have a strong evidential base to understand not just what's the situation, but what the opportunities in the future look like for reskilling our workforce. So thank you, for pulling this really interesting report together. For us as a department, what we're going to do now is have some discussions around and continue to engage with industry and the research sector on what the opportunities here. Really understand if there's particular policy solutions we need to put in place. Some of the ones flagged in the report are really interesting, so we're having a look at those. We're keen to engage with our colleagues in the Department of Education as well and training. There's a lot happening, particularly under the new government around education, around retraining workforces, industry participation in making sure they're industry-led and demanded services that we can provide, and that the training is relevant to industry. But also in that digital space, it's a really critical one for all sectors, and so we're engaging with that education department to understand what they're doing specifically in that digital space, because I think it's interesting that a lot of the things that have come through in the report have got echoes into work that's in train as well. So sorry, that's all a bit vague, but we think that the report's got some great stuff in it, and we're interested in how we can take it forward, but we're just at a pretty early stage of really kind of engaging and seeing what those next steps are. So I can't be particularly definitive, but this comes at a really good time for us. I mean, obviously the Prime Minister's sessions last year on the future of work, and so it's a big part of government thinking at the moment, how digitalisation is impacting sectors, and transport is one of the big ones that people are thinking about, because it affects some current jobs, but it also creates just fantastic opportunities in the future. So yeah, thanks again for this really interesting report.
Thanks, Darren. And I think it's important to contextualise this research so that people know that, something happens with it once it's been done. It's, obviously we publish the results, and iMOVE is looking for opportunities to build on this knowledge as well. So Hadi, you made a brief reference before to a tool that you developed in the course of this project that would allow people to, or at this point in time, allow an assessment of where people sit in contrast to where they need to be with digital skills. What would you, so the reason we haven't demoed that today is because it was more of a proof of concept tool, just to say, hey, this is how we could portray information to people in a way that would help them. How would you see a development of that tool happening in order to make it useful to businesses and organizations?
Yeah, I think one immediate opportunity would be to break this individual skills or requirement into job specific level, saying that, because let's say IoT as just IoT capability, IoT skills may be relevant to one particular job, but not to the other. So I think the next opportunity, very immediate one, will be to build this tool according to the specific job requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so take it at a function level. And is there then a way that can relate to existing frameworks so that people can make sense of it in the wider context?
Absolutely. I think also it's probably one other opportunity will be to validate this against ANSCO job requirements as well, and so the standards to some extent, and that will be more useful also running this for a longer period of time, let's say 2 years, 3 years, and we have, let's say, thousands of people coming and just self-assessing, we be able to collect data from this, and then we'll have a better understanding over a time frame, but also a larger scale on the actual job requirement that we need skills.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I'm aware that we're running out of time now for the presentation and webinar to finish. So I'd just like to thank Hadi and Hussein for all the effort that they've put into this work. We have got one question that's popping through. Are we feeding into the current ABS and SCO review on current and emerging occupations?
So that was one of the feedback we received during the consultation. And as Hadi mentioned, I think this would be a right area for future research going forward.
And we are open because we don't see the names here, please reach directly either to iMOVE or us. We're very, very interested to know what approaches it is recommended for us.
And the report is available in the chat. There's a link to the report on our website, so please feel free to download that and take your time to review the contents. iMOVE would be interested to talk to you about any opportunities that you see from there. Ian, did you have some final questions / comments?
I've got a final question for Hadi and Hussein. So you did some study on the training preferences that people expressed. Can you reflect on the utility or the need for that training to be credentialed, that somebody can take the training that they do in one location and carry it across to another location because the training has been recognized, or is it not yet relevant to start thinking about transferability or transportability of training credentials?
Hadi, maybe this slide.
Sure. So basically, it depends how we define the pathway for it or the articulation for it. We currently at the university sector does recognition of prior learning and prior experience. And to the best of my knowledge, this is not a requirement when someone moves from one job to the other. So, there's a lot of experience that are not formally credited, but when there is definitely opportunity to establish that pathways that you formally credit that point, credit the experience. But just because we're here, I just want to also, because this graph links to another question that Jackie raised. Although the industry is looking for these appears to be a demand for these short courses, again, in relation to that change management and the social skills, normally these short courses do not involve any types of soft skills development. So this is a trade-off that we should look at. These type of short trainings are very good for existing employees, but if you're developing new talent, they may not be the most appropriate ones.
Okay, thanks, Hadi. I'm aware that we've run out of time. So Ian, I know you've probably got another 10 questions, but I'm going to have to, we'll take them on notice. So I'd like to thank Hadi and Hussein for the presentation today, and for the Department of Infrastructure for their support for this project and for running it through iMOVE. It's been a really worthwhile experience. We are interested in seeing what we can do next with this from a research perspective. If you've got ideas or you want to talk to us, then please reach out. Now is a really good time to talk to us about initiatives and projects. And just to note that iMOVE will be at the Smart Energy Conference in Sydney next week. If you want to catch up with us in person, we're presenting there during an EV session. So I know there was a couple of smart energy people in the audience today. So I appreciate everybody's time for the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.